Welcome, everybody. This is part 4 of the TLDC series on job seeking. I am again your guest host, Joseph Suarez, here to walk you through our topic on interviewing. This is a fun one. This is kind of what we've been building up to this whole time. And let's get into it. So far, if you've been with us this whole time, we've gone through how to move on after being let go from a job, searching and applying for jobs, resumes and portfolios, writing those and putting those together. And now we are here at the final part, interviewing. So very excited about this. If you didn't catch the other ones, you can go back to previous Crowdcast sessions to look at those. They'll also be available on the TLDC podcast and YouTube videos. All right, so like I've been saying pretty much every episode here, I think the benefit that I'm providing with my perspective is to really take things from a very high level view and show you what's going on and kind of give yourself that different perspective, maybe put yourself in the shoes of the employer rather than you, the job seeker. And I think that really helps things. By putting things in perspective, it gives you a better sense of things, and in the case of the interviewing, helps you ask maybe better questions or answer questions a little bit better. So in that vein, what I thought I'd do here to start out is to just walk through from the employer's perspective what the hiring timeline looks like. So from start to finish, when they say, all right, we need this job role, until they get it filled, what does that look like? Well, it basically starts with a person fills out a job requisition where they've identified that they need additional headcount. Maybe somebody vacated a role and it just needs to be backfilled. Maybe this is a situation where there's just an increasing amount of work and people come to an agreement that they need an additional person, a new role. So the person that fills out the job requisition basically becomes a hiring manager at this point, is the title that they're given for this process. Now, I should say up front that this could be different at different companies, might not even apply to like a government job because I'm not familiar with that process. But my experience with corporate jobs in the US is it follows this timeline. And then once the job rec is created, a recruiter will work with the hiring manager to make sure that they understand what the job is, because it's the recruiter's role to kind of filter the initial round of candidates. So they need to get a good sense of what the role entails so they can do a good job in their screening process. Next, the recruiter will post the job, and this is where we first start to see things. We see the job has been posted, so we, with a bunch of other people, start to apply and post. This is where all the other stuff we talked about comes into play. We put our resume together. We found the job. We're applying. We're doing all those things, and from our perspective, at that point, it's a waiting game. But behind the scenes, like we talked about, the application tracking system (ATS) is going through and it's filtering out candidates that it doesn't consider to be viable based on whatever criteria the company put in place. But it's also flagging candidates that it thinks might be good candidates. And then it basically presents those to the recruiter, and the recruiter will go through and look at those and maybe identify a few, maybe all of them, depending on how many applications came in. And at that point, the recruiter starts their screening process, where they actually start to reach out to the candidates and schedule phone screen interviews. And we talked about this in previous episodes, the benefit of just being ready for that phone call, being near the phone. Obviously, with a smartphone, it's pretty much always in your pocket or wherever close to you, but being ready for that call, being ready to take notes, being ready to answer questions, and things like that. So after a lot of screening, the recruiter will then take what it considers, or what they consider to be, a good list of candidates to the hiring manager, and then together they would kind of work through maybe why the recruiter thought these were good candidates. And then from that list, they'll kind of narrow it down to a few people that they actually want to bring into what they call in-person interviews. I'm going to say that in air quotes because with a lot of remote jobs and with the current situation of people working remotely, in person is Not necessarily the term that applies, but it's still what this additional round of interviews is called. And then from there, obviously, if you were chosen, you would come in for the in-person interview, likely meeting with the hiring manager, possibly more people at this point. And then after that series of interviews, the hiring manager, possibly with the help of the recruiter and some teammates, will narrow candidates even further, maybe make a decision at that point. Probably have some additional interviews, though. Hopefully not more than one more round of interviews, but it may be necessary. And at this point, it should be down to 2-3 people. They should really be starting to hone in on the people that they think will be the candidate for the role. And then finally, people will debrief and just kind of go over everyone that was involved in the interview process will kind of talk through what they thought of the candidates, how they felt they performed in the interview, how good of a fit they think they'll be in the role, joining the company, that kind of stuff. And then from there, a final decision is made and an offer is extended. And if that offer is accepted, a whole bunch of HR stuff happens that we don't need to get into. If the offer is rejected, kind of have to go back and start from scratch, essentially. Or if the team goes through the interview process and decides that they haven't found a really good candidate and they want to go back to the drawing board, the process repeats over again. So all of that here in orange are the things that are basically what involve you as a job seeker. So the reason I wanted to bring all this up is because there's a lot of things that are going on behind the scenes that you might not be aware of. And it's kind of good to know where you're at in the process, because if you stop to hear back and you're not hearing back, or things are taking longer than maybe you anticipated, you kind of get a sense of why. You can never really know what's happening behind the scenes, but by at least knowing what phase you're in, you can kind of get a sense for what's happening, especially when you get to the later rounds of interviews. Scheduling those interviews might not be the top priority for everyone on the team, and they may have conflicting priorities. So getting everyone scheduled can be difficult. They might need to push back the interview. They might need to push back the meeting where they debrief and talk about who's the best candidate. So those kinds of things can be delayed. So as a job seeker, you're just kind of on hold. You're just waiting, and you were told a certain time period, and you're wondering why things are taking so long. That's the kind of stuff that happens behind the scenes. I've had the privilege of, I tried to think how many, it's at least 4, maybe 5 roles that I've been on the other side of the table for. I've been the interviewer for. These were, let's see, all but one were for a position that would join my team. So I was just coming in basically the third round as an additional interviewer, never one-on-one with the candidate, as part of a group of interviewers that would ask the candidates questions and trying to assess things. And it's a totally different perspective to be on the other side of the table. And I'm fortunate from that position that I got to do that, because now I understand what it's like. And I understand that in a way, it's almost just as nerve-wracking for the person giving the interview as the person, the person that's hosting the interview, I'll say, as the one that is the job candidate. So that helps to again, put yourselves in the shoes of the employer and get their perspective. So looking at things from a slightly different angle about how big the candidate pool is through the whole process. So obviously it starts from 0 before the job is posted, but as soon as it's posted and people start applying, the candidate pool just balloons out. If we assume here that this line here in the middle is 0 and out here is a lot. So it goes from 0 to a lot once people start to apply. And then it's really up to the recruiter and the applicant tracking system to really narrow things down. And that starts with their internal processes, but then gets down to the phone screen process where they are really narrowing the candidate pool down into just a few people that they want to bring in for in-person interviews. And then from there, it just slowly whittle down the candidates into, all right, who are the 2 or 3 or 1 or 2 that we really want to consider for this role? And then once the final decision is reached, the offer is extended. Um, Unofficially, I like to refer to this process as the Bespin process. As you can see, for all Star Wars fans, for everyone that's not a Star Wars fan, just ignore the past 30 seconds of what I just said. All right, so last time I threw this line out there, and I think it's a good thing to bring up again. Just remember that as a job seeker, especially in the interview process, you are really a salesperson, and it's your role to just make one sale, which is to convince the employer that you are the best candidate for the role. And you want to do the best job possible in that regard for several reasons. Obviously, you want the job, but also if you really convince them that you stand above the competition, you have a leg up in the negotiating process at the end, which we'll get into. And remember, we talked about the hierarchy of needs. So you as a job seeker, you want these basic things. Obviously, you need to be compensated, but you're also looking for career growth and you want a sense of fulfillment for the job you do. You want to take some meaning out of what you do. But remember, they have some slightly different things that they want. They want to make sure you're qualified. They want to make sure you're professional. You're going to be coming in on a regular basis when they expect you to, and that you're going to work well with others and those types of things, and that you're going to be a good fit for the company. So again, just as in the application process and the interview process, you want to be putting their needs front and center, even though you'll be talking about yourself a big chunk of the time. So you want to let yourself shine through, but you want to make sure that their needs are still front and center. So everything you're talking about yourself is put through the lens of what their needs actually are for this role and how you can best fulfill them as the most viable candidate. And remember, through this whole process, interviewing is actually a two-way street. It's not just about proving that you're the best candidate and them selecting you as the best candidate. It's also you making sure that this is actually someplace you want to work, that you can enjoy working as, and you want this role versus something else. I know if you're just starting out or you're having trouble getting a job, it doesn't always feel like that. You're may find yourself in a position where you feel like you'll just be happy to take anything. But still, you want to be on a lookout for red flags that show you that, you know what, this might not actually be a good company to work for, or this might not be a good role to take, or this might not be a good person to work for. Generally, I've never seen this not the case. The hiring manager is the person that will be your manager. That's been my case every time I've interviewed. So let's start with the first round, the phone screen. So you've applied and you're waiting to hear back, and then all of a sudden you get a phone call or you get an email to schedule a phone screen. And at this point, you're talking with the recruiter. And it's good. Again, let's put ourselves in the shoes of the recruiter. What's their perspective? Their perspective is they've got this job rec, and it's not their only job rec. They have lots of job recs that they need filled. And their metrics for their job are probably how quickly they can turn things around. And maybe they have better metrics such as how long those people stay in role that they help to hire or something like that. But for the most part, their job is just to quickly turn around these job recs. So their interest is to make sure that you're a good candidate. And if you're not, to kind of move on as quickly as possible. So they're going to be asking you a series of questions, and they almost have a script. I mean, they'll go off script for sure, but they basically have this list of things that they want to make sure they hit with you. So first off, they're going to ask, well, they always ask, is now a good time? And it's funny, I'm never prepared for that question. It's the easiest question they'll ever ask, but I'm always like, well, yeah, now's a good time. I've been waiting for 2 hours for your call. Of course, now's a good time. But I'm glad that they always ask that. And then they'll ask you just to describe yourself, go through your background. And I think it's important to note that you definitely want to impress them, but you want to save your heavy hitting stuff for the hiring manager and other people you interview with. That they're interested in seeing that you're qualified, but you don't need to oversell yourself. It's hard to explain, but you kind of get a sense when they're like, like they've heard enough. You've made your point, And you don't really need to belabor the point and really go into a lot of detail with the recruiter. You just, I don't want to undersell what they do, but with them, you're basically just checking some boxes, making sure you're hitting everything that they are looking for so that you can be moved on to the next round. And they'll ask you things like, why are you interested in this position and this company? So definitely be prepared. Research the company, figure out what they do, and if you can, kind of discern how that fits into the role that you're applying for. And just have something prepared for why you're interested in the role aside from you need a job or something. You want to make it sound like you have some type of passion for this thing that you're applying for. And then, like we talked about, they're going to want to make sure that you're qualified for the job. So they're going to ask you about specific qualifications. So if this is an e-learning position, they're going to ask you your number of years of experience with something like articulate storyline and tools like that. If you're an instructional designer, how many years you've been doing it. If you, how many, I don't know, facilitation, how long you've been doing facilitation, how comfortable you are doing that kind of stuff. Basically, whatever the job is, they're making sure that you're qualified for it. And then the question will come up about salary expectations, and you should definitely be prepared for that. I would almost argue that you should bring it up first because from a negotiating standpoint, it helps to be the one to bring it up first. And for the longest time, I thought I was doing something sneaky and awesome by asking what the salary range for the role is. But I've never had an issue where the recruiter says they can't share that information. They're really happy to share that in every case that I've encountered. So definitely ask. Don't let them trap you into the position of giving a number before they do, essentially. So if they ask you first what your salary expectations are, you can easily flip that back around and say, well, what is the budgeted salary range for this position? And in my experience, they're always happy to tell you. And then from there, my experience is that as long as you're in that range that they say, you're good. So you can kind of chain your response to say that kind of like your low end of what your range is in their high end of their range. Basically, the recruiter is just making sure that you're both playing in the same ballpark as far as salary is concerned. And if they come in way too low, you're free to kind of basically end the conversation at that point. If it's not a pay that you're willing to settle for, there's no harm in just walking away and thanking the person for their time. All right. So questions I like to ask in the phone screen back to the recruiter, I like to think of it like, excuse me. I like to think of it, that did not help at all. Excuse me. I like to think of it like this. My conversation with the recruiter is my time to ask very basic general questions so that I can make sure my time with the hiring manager and anyone else that I interview with is I use that time most effectively. So I want to get all those general questions out of the way with the recruiter first so that I can maximize my time with the other people I interview with. So the first thing I want to know is, why is this role open? If this is a newly created role, fine. I'm happy with that. If it's a role that was vacated, I'm going to have some questions about why it was vacated. I want to know where that person ended up, why they left. If I get a question like, oh, that person ended up moving out of town, so unfortunately they had to move and they were very sad about it. Okay, that's one thing. If I get a question or if I get an answer that basically says, well, the person left the company, that's going to be my first red flag. Like, okay, well, why did the person leave the role? What's going on here? Is this a toxic role? Is this a toxic team, a toxic company? What's going on? And then, like I mentioned in a previous episode, you're probably going to get a canned answer, but I just like to ask the recruiter what the company culture is like and what their stance on work-life balance is. And if you feel like you're not getting a personalized answer, you can always ask them, just ask them personally, why do you like working there? And like we talked about last time, if they hesitate for a while, that really tells you something. But again, they'll probably have kind of a canned answer about, it's going to sound like they really bought into the company culture, because that's basically their job. And then I also want to ask information about the team that this role sits on. How many people are on the team? What's the reporting structure look like? Am I going to be a team of one that reports to somebody? Am I going to be working with other instructional designers, e-learning developers, those types of roles? What's it look like? And then I want to ask, like I mentioned, just the general high-level questions about the role that I don't want to waste time in different interviews, higher level interviews, with those. And then benefits. Of course, you shouldn't make it look like all you care about is benefits, but I think the time with the recruiter is the best time to ask these questions. Again, because it's going to make you look really unprofessional if you get to meet with the person that's going to be your manager and you're like, and tell me about your 401k matching and what kind of insurance do you have and this and that. So get those questions out of the way, but just don't make sure that it's becoming the main focus of the interview with the recruiter. And the last thing I'll say about the phone screen is keep in mind, you can always come back and have a conversation or email questions to the recruiter at a later point. So don't think that you have this small window of time to talk to them. You can always come back to them with questions that you don't want to bug the hiring manager with, or you don't feel like it's worth reaching out to them for. So keep that in mind. Another thing that I just remembered is it always seems like the recruiter will schedule a half hour with you, but I think behind the scenes they reserve an hour or maybe 45 minutes, because I've never had a recruiter ever get to the half hour mark and feel like, okay, we got to wrap this call up. Like it always seems like they're ready to go beyond that. But I like to think that as a job applicant, in my attempts to prove that I'm a professional, one of the things I want to prove is that I can run and manage a meeting effectively. So if we get to the end of our allotted time, I want to ask if it's okay that I still have a few questions, and if it's okay for us to run over a little bit. And that goes with the additional rounds of interviews as well. Okay, so that brings us to round 2. So you got through the phone screen interview. You aced that, and they decide that they want to bring you in for in-person interviews. Now, like I said, right now, that will probably mean doing some type of video conferencing type interview where it's a very similar setup to here. As an e-learning developer / multimedia guy, this is basically my setup that I use when I come in for that type of interview. Just got the nice camera, lights, and video and that kind of stuff, just to prove that I know my stuff from that perspective. Now, the way you can prepare for this round of interview is be prepared for 2 types of questions: the general questions that you're going to be asked, and you can go online and look for what those will be from a generic perspective, but then also be prepared to answer questions about your work history and specific things that apply to this role. And then the questions that companies love to ask, but in my experience, no one likes to ask them and no one likes to answer them: behavioral-based questions. So these are the questions that are like, describe a time when you had a conflict with a coworker and how did you resolve it? And describe a project where you were having trouble getting information from a subject matter expert, blah, blah, blah. So be prepared for those types of questions. There's a method called the STAR format. It just stands for situation, task, action, and response. So you want to tailor your responses into that format. So situation is basically describing what took place, setting the stage for the story that you're about to tell. The task is what you were responsible for doing, basically. The action is what you did in response to that. And the result, the one you definitely don't want to leave off, but it's easy to, is what happened as a result and what was the benefit of your actions. That's the big one that you want to prove. So if you're talking about a project you did, as a learning solution, your results should definitely include some type of evaluation. How did you know that the impact of what you did was positive? So be prepared to give those types of answers. Um, and the best way that I found to prepare for behavioral based questions is to just think through your work history. And if you're just starting out, think of your experience in school or other jobs you've had. Like if you don't have a big, long work history, it's okay to bring up situations from jobs that don't necessarily apply to the learning and development field. So if you're a barista at Starbucks and you can think of a situation that answers this question appropriately, then go for it. But you want to just think through your work history. So look up like common behavioral based questions, look through your work history, and you want to start you can even write them down, just stories based on your experience that you've had that answer these types of questions. And you want to just kind of practice those in your head and be thinking about those stories, and have them ready in your mind for reference to pull up when you get asked these questions. And then finally, you want to come in with your own thoughtful list of questions. There will always be time at the end of the interview for you to ask questions, and you definitely want to have some. Because again, it's a two-way street. You want to make sure that this is a job you actually want to work for, but you also want to, again, through your questions, prove that you're professional, that you're someone that can grow with the company. So when you're asking questions about, so describe to me, you basically want to ask about their stance on professional development. You want to ask what kind of career pathing options there are from the perspective of this role that you're applying for. Like where, if you were to come into the role and you wanted to be promoted, what does that look like? What are your options? That type of thing. So those fit your own needs for your own career development, but they also fill the need of demonstrating that you're a professional and you want to come in and stay long-term with the company and grow. So come in with those thoughtful questions for sure. Here's some questions I like to ask. I like to ask the manager, and I love when it catches them off their guard. I want them to describe their management style to me. And I basically have to take them on their word for it, but it's good to hear what their perspective is. Now, I did have one situation where the role I was applying for, I knew the person that was leaving that role. So I asked that person to tell me about their manager. And then I came into the interview and asked that manager what their management style was. And the answers were completely different. The person that was leaving the role told me that they were a complete micromanager, that they had a problem. The manager didn't trust this person to do their job, and they were constantly hovering over them. And the manager told me that she thought she was hands off and that she let people kind of do their own thing. And that was a huge red flag for me because it told me, because I trusted my friend's perspective, there was no reason why she wouldn't tell me the truth. It told me that this manager had a complete lack of insight into her own management style and how it was perceived. And I just like to ask these questions like, in my first 90 days on the job, what would you expect me to accomplish? What does success look like for this role? It's really telling when you ask, and how is that measured? And they don't really have anything. That tells me that they don't have a solid system in place for performance reviews, or at least tying performance to the actual job. So that tells me that a year could go by when I'm in the role, and that comes time for performance review, and they might not have a good process in place for how they're going to measure my performance throughout the year, which could impact how much of a raise I get, essentially. And then what's the long-term vision for this role? So especially if it's just opening up, it's a great opportunity to come in and describe yourself as someone who can come in and really take this role places. So by knowing what their long-term vision for that role is, you can kind of say that's great and give your own perspective about what you can do in the role and how you can take it places that they might not have even considered. And then the question I love to ask at the end, it tells me many things, is at the end of the interview, my second to last question is, do you have any concerns based on what we talked about today, based on what you've seen from my resume and my portfolio and our conversations here? Do you have any concerns about me coming into this role? And again, a story I'll tell is that I had a situation where the guy that was interviewing me, the hiring manager, he said no. And then I got turned down for the role and I asked why. And they cited some reasons that he easily could have told me. And that tells me that I either really threw him off guard with that question and he was uncomfortable with it, or he just wasn't being honest, or he was too timid or something like that. Either way, that told me that it was probably for the best that I didn't get that role, because I probably didn't want to work for someone that couldn't answer that question openly and honestly with me when I asked it. And then the very last question I always ask in every interview is, what are next steps from here? And they'll tell you, and it's a good opportunity to kind of gauge where you're at. Because if they say something like, well, we have a lot of other candidates that we still need to interview, and if they start with something like that, it could be a little telling that maybe you're not performing as well. If they say, well, we'll have you come in for another interview, and you're good because you're on to the next round. Now the second round could be it. This could be the only round of interviews from this point on that they want to do, and they could debrief and make a decision. Or they can have you come in for more. In the meantime, they may pull this thing that kind of drives me crazy, where they want you to do an assignment. And it's basically homework to prove that you can do the things that they are asking you to do for this role. And that's fine. I get why they do that. I have two big problems with these types of things. The first is, as a company, you need to be making these assignments extremely generic to the point where anything someone submits to you is unusable. Like, if you want someone to demonstrate that they can use articulate storyline, have them make a course about how to do laundry or bake cookies, or just something so generic that no one could ever turn it around and use it. But time and again, I have seen companies ask me to basically do work for them by using this assignment, and it really makes me mad. I walked away from one job as a result of it. And it's tough because it puts you in a tough position, because you need a job. You decide at this point you want to work here, but you have this moral dilemma essentially. And I don't know if there's a good way to handle it. Maybe you can come back and say, I don't feel comfortable doing this work that looks like it's tied to the actual role. Can you give me something more generic? So that's my first problem with these assignments. My other problem is, as an e-learning developer with what I consider to be a pretty strong portfolio, why do I need to do this for you? I've proven myself that I can do this. Do you not trust me when I say that everything in my portfolio is stuff that I've created, and I'm upfront about the things that I didn't have a direct role in? Am I not proving myself enough for you? Why do I have to do this assignment now? So those are my problems with it. If you feel like you have to go through with the assignment, even though it looks like you're doing work for them, you can try things like, don't give them the final source files. Put things up. What I've done before is I put things up on my webpage at a URL, and then the second I got turned down for the job, I pulled that URL down. Because they're not going to go back in and look at the sample I made for them. That's gone. They lost that when they turned me down for the role. So it's tricky, do it carefully. But if it is a good assignment and you feel good about it, definitely put your best foot forward. And this is your chance to basically show off how you handle every task you're given. So ask what the time frame is. Make sure you ask about the parameters of the assignment, making sure you're meeting all of those, things like that. I'm not seeing any questions come in the Q&A. So if you have some specific questions, go ahead and drop them in. because it's really hard for me to scan the chat and respond while I'm talking. But thank you guys for coming in today and engaging in the chat. So if you get to a third round, this may be where if you didn't meet previously with members of the team that you'd be joining in addition to the hiring manager, this may happen here. But more or less, the third round is just more of the same now with more people. So it's going to be new faces, team members, maybe some senior leaders, things like that. But for more or less, it's going to be the same exact thing. You're going to prepare the same way. They're going to have more behavioral based questions for you and things like that. As an e-learning developer, I've found that now's when they bring in their technical guy to really drill me on, okay, do you know this stuff? And I had one where the guy was really trying to trip me up with some JavaScript question, like not really specific, but it's like, well, tell me how you've used JavaScript with Storyline to like, yeah, if you know your stuff, you'll tell me how you've used JavaScript and Storyline. And I gave him an answer and he seemed pretty satisfied with it. I just thought it was funny that the non-technical people are always like, all right, bring this techie guy in here, make sure he knows his stuff, because we don't know. It sounds like he knows his stuff, but we don't know. So yeah, third round. A fourth round I think is insane unless you're interviewing for like a senior CLO position or something, and now you're meeting with, the senior suite people or something. A fourth round for an associate role or even a senior role would tell me that they really need to refine their hiring process a bit and cut these rounds of interviews down. But if you get to that point, you probably still want to go through with it because you're really getting close. They're narrowing the candidate pool down to, if it's a fourth round, it probably can't be more than 3 people. It's got to be 2 or 3 people. So it's you, somebody else, and you're in a good position at this point. Next, if you get through, you're chosen as the candidate, you will be given an offer. And you get a phone call, and they basically say, congratulations, we want to extend to you an offer. And they will tell you what that offer is in the compensation, in the form of compensation. And here's where things get interesting. So I strongly advise everyone to not immediately accept the initial offer and go through some form of negotiating. And it's expected that you will not immediately accept the initial offer. And if you do, I hate to say it, but you're kind of seen as leaving money on the table. I don't want to say you're a sucker, but you are seen as leaving money on the table if you accept that initial offer. So always counter at least once. If you want to push it further, you can. And if you're not comfortable doing this kind of thing, I said this a little bit in a previous episode. I really strongly advise you to do some research in this area and study up on it. I've even gone as far as to write out a script for thinking through all the different ways things could go. So if the offer's way low, then I'm just going to walk away. Essentially, it's a walk away number is what it is. If it's just below what I'm hoping for, I have one set of script that I'm going to go through. If it's on point, I'm still going to pretend like it's a little bit lower than what I'm comfortable with to have them come up. And if it's way above what I'd like or was what I was expecting, I will do my best to contain my excitement and still express that I would like it to come up a little bit more. So that's the negotiating process in a nutshell. Never accept the initial offer. And again, I really strongly recommend that script idea if you're not comfortable with this process. If you're not somebody that goes to buy a car and get excited haggling with the car salesman, then I highly recommend a script. So that's been my experience with interviewing. I do have another perspective I want to share that I forgot to earlier on. So let me get to that now. Let me just pull it up because it came in as an email. So Kim Lindsay, I think it was the second episode, she asked me a question about risk. And I wasn't really sure at the time what her question meant, but she sent me an email to kind of clarify. and she sent me the perspective of her recruiter friend, which I think is some great perspective that I want to share. So she says that from the recruiter's perspective, companies will always hire the candidate that is the best fit with the least amount of risk. So you can be the perfect fit for a position, but if you appear to have substantially more risk for the business than the next qualified candidate, they're probably going to pass you over for that next qualified candidate. So keep that in mind. And as an interviewer, this recruiter guy shared that from his perspective, he's always looking out for things like, does this person seem to be hard to get along with? Are they openly angry at their former employer? So you really want to be professional when you're talking about past employers. Even if you had a sour relationship, you don't want to talk negatively about them, because from the employer's perspective, they're going to say, wow, look at that, how this person talks negatively about their previous company. Are they just going to come in and do the same with us? And then, are they going to be a troublemaker? Are they going to be so focused on their personal life that they won't be committed to the job? So if you're making sure that your interview answers are tailored to the employer's needs, you probably shouldn't be giving off that vibe that you're so self-focused that your personal life is going to dominate the job. Will they show up on time and commit to 40 hours? Will they miss deadlines? How truthful do they seem to be? Are they claiming to have skills they don't actually have? Are they claiming to have won awards without disclosing that they were a very minor contributor? Yeah, be careful about that one. Will they honor NDAs and or non-compete agreements? If they invest in onboarding and training, or if the company invests in onboarding and training this person, will they stay long enough to justify that expense? Does the candidate have unrealistic expectations about, the duties assigned, opportunities for advancement, or salary? And it's not one size fits all. It partly depends on the corporate culture, the team, the department, and their individual cultures as well. Very cool. So thank you again to Kim for sharing that perspective. I'm happy to be sharing some perspective other than my own in this series. Okay, we have a bunch of questions in the Q&A that I will happily get to. So the question is, it's coming to the top. Could assignments also be a puzzle? For example, to see if training is the right solution? That's a great question. I was given an assignment that I needed to basically write some content for, it was a content writing assignment essentially, but the details of the assignment just raised so many red flags from an instructional design perspective that I really only half did the assignment, because I only had like 48 hours to do it. And I spent the majority of that time outlining what I saw as red flags about what I was being asked to do. And I spent the time in the interview process basically saying, here's my problem with what I have with what you presented me with. And this turned out to be a real world thing that they were doing, that they were just using the assignment to get free work essentially. But it was a way that I demonstrated to them that, like, I'm not just going to come in here and be an order taker. If you ask me to do something that's not instructionally sound, I'm going to raise some questions. So I think it was a risk, but I think that ended up actually working in my favor. Kara Spray, different Kara, asks, do you just counter with money or also benefits? Great question. So early on in your career, you're really, well, at any point, if you know what the benefits are that you're walking into, you may be able to negotiate some of that. But early on in your career, your base pay is basically what you're going to get. Later on in your career, you start to look at total compensation a little bit more, because you're now eligible for things like bonuses and stock and things like that. I've never been privileged enough to have stock, but but the bonus thing has come into play for the senior roles that I've been a part of. You definitely have some wiggle room. I've even seen it as part of the negotiating process is starting out with base pay and then getting them to come up on base pay. And then you pull out, okay, now that we've talked about that, let's talk about benefits and trying to see if you can bring them up there. And again, what I would really encourage you guys to do is go research salary negotiation on your own, because most of what I'm sharing with you today, yes, it's some of my personal experience, but most of it is I just read a bunch of articles and watched a bunch of YouTube videos on how to do it to train myself. But one of the things that I've seen mentioned is that, oh, I totally lost my train of thought. I'm sorry. Let me try and, where was I going with that? Oh man, I'm sorry. But yeah, you do have the opportunity to negotiate more than just your base pay. Okay, I remember what I was thinking. So if they won't come up initially in your salary, you can get in the negotiating process. You can get them to agree that if you come in and perform in the first year very solidly, that you'll revisit this salary question. So you're setting it that on day one, okay, I'll come in at this salary that I think is a little bit low, but in a year from now, we both agree that we're revisiting this and that we're going to talk about this again. And my expectation is that I'm going to get a nice sizable raise as long as I meet the performance objectives that we set out to. So if you get to that point, you definitely want to make sure that you are working with your manager to figure out what those performance metrics are, get them in writing so you both have them, and that you're meeting those objectives throughout the year. You're making sure you're hitting all those so that when it comes time for your performance review, you're just saying, yep, look at that, checked all the boxes. And like we talked about, I expect some returning compensation as a result. So there's lots of ways to go about the negotiation process. Research. Nadia asks, when answering the result impact of training and talking about evaluation, what kind of evaluation results can we talk about? So that totally depends on the project, but anything that you can recall about it, and you probably want to make sure, if you can, that you're including the stories that had some good evaluation metrics tied to it. So one of the ones I always bring up is when I was at a company and we were able to prove level 4 Kirkpatrick as a result, because these were some metrics that as a result of the training, we were able to prove that as a result of the training. I can't really describe what it was without going into a lot of detail, but incident rates went down substantially, like soon after the training. Like it was very clear that the training had a direct influence in that drop in incident rates, which proved through a combination of those metrics and some survey results, we were able to prove level 3 and level 4 impact. But as far as what kind of evaluation results, anything you can come up with that just prove that the training had some type of positive impact. If that's only anecdotal, that might be enough. But yeah, if you can back it up with data, especially if you're applying for a company that's very data driven, that always helps. Okay, Kara asks, what makes somebody risky? I think just you demonstrate that, I don't know, you just want to come across as you're not going to be a risk for the term that I've heard while I'm working at companies is flight risk. Like, are you at risk of just bolting, essentially? So there's so many different ways someone can be risky. Are they going to just up and leave the job? Are they going to come in? Are they a smooth talker that's going to come in and wow us? But as soon as they hit their 90-day mark where we can't just let them go for no reason, are they going to just slack off and be somebody that is kind of a drag on the organization and the team and everything? Are they going to be somebody? I mean, just that list of stuff I went through. From the recruiter's perspective, what they shared. Okay. Well, guys, we have about 10 minutes left. So if you have any last minute questions, put them in the Q&A. But at this point, I just want to thank everybody for attending these sessions. I really did put this together. Like I mentioned, from the first episode, I was let go in late April. And as much as that sucked, I knew I was in a position that I could turn things around and I was going to be back up on my feet in no time. And what really broke my heart is knowing that other people weren't in that same position. And I wanted to do something to help people out. So that's why I created this series. That's why I threw it out there. Yeah, I'm getting some side benefits. I'm able to prove that I can lead a discussion online. I can maybe possibly even find a job opportunity out of this. But this really is the reason that I threw this out there into the world, is to help those that aren't in a position as fortunate as I am to find a new job. And I really hope you got something out of it. If you did, please share it with other people. Please share the knowledge that you've gained from this with other people. Yeah, that's my ask. And then my final ask is pay it forward. If you got something out of this free 4-part session that I've put together, pay it forward. Do something for somebody else. It doesn't necessarily have to be job related. Just whatever it is, pay it forward. And I would be eternally grateful if you just continue the chain. So yeah, with that, I mean, if you guys want to connect, again, that's my LinkedIn. Be sure to put a message in there that you saw the session and that's why you're connecting. I'm on Twitter. So again, just thanks everybody. And here comes Luis. Wants to give a word, I think.
Yeah, just a word. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Yeah, Joseph, when you proposed this one, I was like, yeah, let's see how that, this is like an important topic, to talk about. And I was really impressed with you taking this on. And I've been thinking a lot about, the number of people that have registered for this series and kind of the importance of just getting everybody, finding a solution to help people find work that need it. And so I'm going to be sending an email to everybody afterwards where basically if you're like unemployed or if you are looking for a job or if you just need the help, I'm going to send out kind of free membership sort of options. And then also I want to be able to kind of just showcase you in one of these crowdcasts if you're unemployed or just want to do it as a registered member, so that you can add it to your portfolio if you'd like. And then I also have a graphic designer that is working on some badges right now that you can add to your portfolio or add to your to your resume so that you can show that you're part of a professional development organization. And hopefully that'll help. I mean, we all have challenges right now, and I'm just trying to figure out some solutions. So after this is wrapped up, I'm going to be sending out that email. I'm just trying to get everything to scale right, but I'm just going to open it up because this has just been a tough year. No live conference. So the whole membership idea I'm just having to reassess it. And yeah, so thanks for doing this, Joe.
Yeah. And, I'll just build on that and say, like I said in a previous episode, networking is a two-way street as well. So it's just as much about what you give as what you can get. And this community, I've been involved with the TLDC community. I know the C stands for community, but I've been involved for a while now. And it truly is a very genuine group of people. And then anyone that's watching now that's on the fence about being a member or whatever, definitely check us out. Definitely go check out the Slack group and participate there. It's a great place to ask questions. So yeah, just a ringing endorsement for TLDC from me.
Yeah, but don't wait until I have some special registration codes for the free membership. So, don't sign up for anything. Otherwise you'll have to pay the full price, but wait for the discounted stuff. And then once the badges, I'll have more details, but once the badges and all of that are ready. And, one of the challenges I do have, I'm just going to throw this out there real quick. One of the challenges I do have is that Crowdcast only allows a certain number of broadcasts per month now for my account. And so I'm probably going to have to migrate some of that over to YouTube to be able to properly do some of these broadcasts, which I'm kind of excited about because I think it'd be very cool. That said, if anybody wants to participate in those or even host those and just want to get a feel for it, I'd be happy to let you in on that. Just let me know. But yeah, and then join us over in tldchat.us. That's the Slack group. It's fairly active. Just get in there. You have any questions at all? I'm trying to rebuild that one a little bit so that there's more activity in there. So it's just all a work in progress.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for having me.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Thanks everybody for coming in. And I guess we're just going to go close this out and happy summertime to everybody. Oh, it's not quite summertime yet, but happy June to all of you.
Close enough.
All right. See you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.